Hello everybody, this is Ryan Shields. I'm the youth minister here at St. Joseph's, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about the church, and more specifically, we're going to talk about the hierarchy of the church. All right, so the hierarchy of the church. Now, there's a lot that can go into this, right? So we're going to try to keep it simple, right? I think that's the best way forward, because there are a lot of complexities. And as I learned more about the church, and the more I learned about priests and religious orders and everything, the deeper it goes. I mean, I remember one time when I was in seminary when I'm like, well, how does this all work, right? Like I vaguely knew and we studied it a little bit, but I wanted to know, like, well, how does it all work? So I went and did a deep dive, right? And when I do a deep dive on a subject, I could spend hours searching through stuff on the internet, reading different articles, doing different sources, finding other people's opinions about it. I mean, when I say when I did a deep dive on this, it was hours long. And at the end, even though I had more knowledge, I still felt like there was so much more to learn. And that's the nature of a lot of these subjects that we talk about. I give you guys a 10 to 12 minute video, or sometimes 15 minutes. It just kind of depends on how long-winded I am that day. But I give you guys these videos, and there could be a lot more to the subject that I don't give you, but it's just because I'm trying to give you guys a base knowledge, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a base knowledge about the hierarchy of the church. So when we talk about the church, you can look at it as like rings that kind of come in, right? And the outer two rings we're actually going to talk about next week, right? And that's going to be the lay faithful, right, that we're a part of, and then the religious life, people in religious life, right? So for today's purposes, talking about the hierarchy, we're not really going to talk about the lay faithful, and we're not really going to talk about the people that are in religious life. That we're going to save until next week. But this next ring is where we're going to start talking about more about today, right? And this next ring, it's going to be priests and deacons. And anybody who's Catholic, we know at the basic level who our priest is, right? You know that here at St. Joseph's right now, as we sit in January of 2021, we have 3 priests that are assigned to our parish from the diocese. And that's Father Sam, who is our pastor. And then we have Father Michael, and we also have Father Shaker, right? Those 3 priests, they're assigned to our parish, and they're our spiritual leaders, right, for our parish. As parishioners here, we know who our priests are, right? We see them every Sunday. We listen to their homilies. Right now, we're watching them online. We're seeing some of the stuff they have to say. Father Sam has his morning coffee talks that he posts, and different priests have different homilies for different days. We have direct interaction with these people, right? And it's at our local parish level. But the actual layer of priests and deacons goes a little bit further than just that. First, let's talk about priests and deacons, and then we'll talk about the 2 different types. So a deacon is an ordained person, right? He's ordained by a bishop to be a deacon. And there is things that he does at Mass, like he helps a priest with Mass, and he also does work in the community, right? His job is usually very specific within the community, doing something like a minister to the prisons, or a minister to the sick, or there's a variety of different things. But these are men who usually have other jobs during the day, but they also have this extra responsibility of being an actual ordained by a bishop minister of the church. So they help out in Mass on Sunday, and they have this other job for the church that they do. Priests, on the other hand, are men who are ordained by a bishop for service in a diocese or a religious order. And they're the primary ministers of the sacraments, right? They baptize kids, and deacons can also baptize as well. So deacons, within their liturgical role is baptism, and they can also witness marriages, and that's another thing that the priests can do. But the primary difference between a priest and a deacon is a priest's full-time job is usually working for the diocese or for his religious order. And the second key difference is that he can both hear confession and preside at Mass and preside over the Eucharist, right? So without the priests, we don't have the Eucharist. They're the ones who bring us the Eucharist to our local parishes, to our local communities, and they also bring the sacrament of reconciliation to our local communities as well. So, like I said before, with these priests and deacons, there are two types of priests and deacons. There are priests and deacons who work within a diocese, like our priests here at St. Joseph. They work for a diocese, which a diocese is just an area of land, right? An area of the country or of the state. Like in our instance, our diocese, the Diocese of Stockton, covers Stockton and the surrounding areas, right? We go clear down to Turlock, where we go to the mountains, and we go up to the coastal mountains, and we go just a little bit north of Stockton as well. So that this big landmass and all the churches in it are all part of the diocese, right? And so our priests work for the diocese, and they do parish administration, they do vocations work, they work in the chancery office, which is the office that holds the bishop and all the different departments. They might work in that office, but they're working in a local community, a regional community, to serve the people of that community for the church, right? The deacons, who are diocesan deacons or deacons belonging to a diocese, do the same thing. But they're usually more tied to a specific parish because, like I said, they have other jobs and they may live in a region, and so they own a house in that region. So that's one of a couple parishes are only going to be the only parishes they're ever assigned to. Whereas a parish priest can be assigned to any parish in the diocese at any time, and it's not his decision. Right, so he serves with the bishop, and the bishop is the one who decides who goes where, what priest goes to what parish, all those decisions. It's the bishop and those people that are under him that decide that. Now, the other level of priests and deacons that we have are religious priests and deacons. And we'll talk a little bit about religious orders next week, but these priests and deacons are part of a religious order. So they could be a Dominican, or they could be a Benedictine, or Franciscan, or you name it, right? There's a bunch of different orders. Jesuits, anyway, there's a bunch of different orders, but they belong to a religious order. So they've consecrated themselves and made promises to that order specifically. And then now they are ordained as ministers within that order for whatever the mission is of that order. So they'll say masses for their order. They'll say masses for a community, right? If their order is in charge of a parish, maybe they'll be at that parish as well. They perform a lot of the same duties as a diocesan priest in the liturgical functions that they do. Meaning that they're there for communion and for the Eucharist and whatnot. But outside of that, instead of running a local parish or ministering to a local area, they'll have a very specific ministry that they work in. Like if you're a Holy Cross priest and you're at the University of Portland, or if you're at Notre Dame, your primary job is probably going to be in education, in either administration or actually teaching theology or philosophy or whatever field that you're specialized in, right? So they do that, and then they're also priests for their order. So that's the two different kind of priests, right? Either you work for a diocese and a bishop, or you work with your religious order that you've consecrated your life into, right? Now let's take the next step up. We have our bishops, right? And every priest is tied to the local bishop. Whether or not you're in a religious order or whether or not you're a diocesan priest, your priesthood is tied to the bishop that is in your local area. So what makes a bishop, right? So we know priests are ordained ministers by bishops. Well, what makes a bishop? A bishop is consecrated, right? A bishop is somebody who is consecrated to God and consecrated to the church in a ceremony. So he's the next level up from a priest. A priest gets his hands blessed, and bishops get oil poured over, they used to pour oil over their entire head to consecrate them. But the bishop is a natural successor to the apostles. So in the Bible, we have the disciples who are with Jesus. After Jesus dies and rises again, then you have the apostles, right? And the apostles take on the work of the church. These apostles become the first bishops. And throughout history, every bishop can trace his lineage back to the original apostles. And how it's traced is by who consecrates them as a bishop. And we see it in the Bible, right? We see that when one of the apostles dies, the other apostles get together, they pick a new apostle, and then they or they pick a new person and they make that person an apostle. So you have all these bishops, right, who are the successors of the apostles, who are our modern day apostles. And they are all equal. Now, you might be saying, well, Ryan, I know that there's a diocese, there's archdioceses, there's cardinals, and there's the Pope. They're all bishops, but they're obviously at different levels. Well, they may function at different levels in the hierarchy, but at the sacramental level, they're all the same. Just like Father Sam's the pastor, right? But the two other priests that serve here, they're not any less of a priest because they're not the pastor, but they help Father Sam being the pastor of this parish. The same thing, all the bishops work together for the church. And just because there's different, there might be a different hierarchy, doesn't make them sacramentally any different. They're all bishops, but they have different roles. Some are bishops, some are associate bishops, and then some are, archbishops. And some of those archbishops become cardinals, and some of the other high-ranking bishops become cardinals. Those are just close advisors to the Pope. One last note on bishops who are heads of dioceses, right? We know that our local cathedral is in Stockton, right? And cathedral just means it's the church that houses the cathedra. And the cathedra is the chair, the actual physical chair that the bishop sits on during Mass in the cathedral. So the bishop's primary parish, right, is going to be the cathedral. And when he's at Mass, he sits at the cathedra. He sits at the chair that's housed in the cathedral, meaning the church of the chair, for the diocese. And the Pope, right? So that, just tying us in, the Pope sits on the cathedra of the Diocese of Rome. So whoever is the Bishop of Rome sits on the cathedra, or the chair of the Diocese of Rome, and he is the successor of St. Peter in that diocese. And that's what makes him the Pope. So, like I said, these cardinals, they get together, they elect a Pope, usually from amongst themselves, but really the Pope only has to be a male Catholic. Let's say, for argument's sake, they decided I was going to be the next Pope. Never going to happen. But let's say that they decided, right? What would happen? What would have to happen is I would have to be ordained a priest, then I would have to be elevated to bishop before I could be made the Bishop of Rome and the Pope. So you do have to be a bishop, a priest and a bishop to be the Pope. However, you don't have to be a priest or bishop at the time of election to be the Pope. But in order to assume that role, you have to be made both a bishop or priest and a bishop. But it's usually chosen amongst the cardinals, because these are they're men of great faith. They're men who have dedicated their lives to the church, and they've been serving in leadership roles in the church for a very long time. And they pray about it, and they ask the Holy Spirit to guide them, and that's how they pick the next Pope, and the Pope becomes the leader of the church. And like I've said before, just because the Pope is the Pope doesn't mean whatever he decides goes, right? He still works within the magisterium, which is the teaching authority of the church, which is all the bishops together form the teaching authority of the church, right? So he still works within the magisterium, but he's the head of the church. Any disputes will be handled by the Pope and his advisors. That's why Pope Francis is the head of the church here on earth. He's the successor of St. Peter, and he's the one that we look to settle theological disputes and to help guide the whole universal church. He works together with his brother bishops, which include cardinals, archbishops, and bishops and associate bishops. They all work together to move the church along, right? And those bishops rely on their priests, the priests of their diocese and the priests of religious orders, to help them move the mission of the church along as well. So one more time before we get into our saint of the day, we have the Bishop of Rome, right? The Pope is at the top of the hierarchy, right? He's at the very center of the circle. And then that next ring out is going to be the bishops, right? And the bishops include associate bishops, archbishops, and cardinals. They're all in that next ring out. They all have different jobs within the hierarchy of the church, but they're all in that next second ring, right? And then the next ring out is going to be the priests and the deacons. Now, some of the priests are going to be part of a diocese, and deacons are going to be part of a diocese, and the other priests and deacons are going to be part of religious orders. And then we have the consecrated and religious people in religious life, and then we have the lay faithful. So the consecrated and religious life section, and the lay faithful we'll talk a little bit more about next week. But that is all on our topic for the hierarchy of the church today. So without further ado, let's get into our saint of the week. Our saint of the week this week is Saint Gregory the Great, and he was a pope. When he was in his 30s, Gregory sold many of his properties he owned in order to establish 7 monasteries in Italy, and he distributed much of his considerable wealth to the poor. The next year he became a monk and devoted himself to an austere lifestyle and contemplation and pastoral care of the plague-stricken in Rome. Because he was well known for his holiness, in AD 590 he was elected pope. Although he did not want the role, he accepted it. As pope, he continued to care for the poor and the hungry and challenged other leaders to attend to those in need, rather than the worldly interests of the church. Gregory also recognized the need for reform in the church and imposed important changes in its government. He promoted monasticism and is credited with writing many of the prayers recited at Mass. Especially noteworthy among his writings is Pastoral Care, which describes the ministry of bishops as the shepherding of souls. It became the textbook of medieval bishops. Gregory's way of referring to himself as Pope was as the servant of the servants of God. He is the patron saint of England, musicians, singers, teachers, popes, and victims of plague. His feast day is September 3rd. What a perfect person for our saint of the week this week. I mean, Gregory the Great, not only is he the patron saint of popes, and we're talking about the hierarchy of the church, and he very, his writings on how a bishop should be a shepherd for his local area. I mean, yeah, he's just perfect for our talk this week. However, also, I mean, he's the patron saint of people afflicted with the plague. And as of this taping, it is January 2021, and we are still, even though we have a vaccine, we are still in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. So Saint Gregory the Great, please pray for us and watch over us, both as a church and as victims of this plague of sorts in coronavirus. Pope Gregory, pray for us. That is all for this week. Thank you so much for your time. God bless, and see you next time.